came to your shores to use you!
Each week in between episodes of Shogun, I watch the trailer and think about making a video, and then go, and decide against it. They're really short, and they're kind of like watching Mariko's lead samurai take out the guards in episode 9. There's an opening bow, a first move that leaves one opponent unable to hold his sword while he slashes the neck of the second, and one more final blow to fingerless and it's done. A lot is going on, which hopefully I just demonstrated, but the main problem is that having read the book and knowing about the history it's based on, there isn't much mystery in them. This week feels different because we're approaching the finale, which is exciting and also a little bit disappointing that it's almost over, but there is a possibility that the show could surprise us and do its own thing. To this point, it's retained the spirit of the novel while telling its own story. Rather than giving away the ending and saying where I think they might deviate, I'm going to talk about what I'd like to see happen based on what I've picked up from breaking down each of these episodes along the way. Hopefully that will get you thinking and build excitement and not take away from the experience. I'm not trying to be that arrow that got buried in Mariko's samurai's neck and brought an early end to his advance. We'll talk about the trailer and scenes from other trailers we haven't seen yet, and some of what's out there about the finale. We'll talk about each of the characters, and some general thoughts about how the show's version is different. Before we get into any of that, I thought it might make sense to talk about what Shogun by James Clavell is about. The book is a lot of things, primarily a work of historical fiction that takes a bunch of important figures from history, from early 17th century Japan, reimagines them as fictional characters, and then explores how the end of the Sengoku period played out. Sengoku translates to warring states, and was a time defined by civil wars throughout Japan. It's not a war story, but more about the political maneuvering that went into trying to end that very chaotic and very violent era. On the surface, it's a book about the differences between Japanese and Western culture. The book chooses this period because they are largely mysteries to each other, so it can introduce a character like Blackthorne to offer an outsider's view into an advanced culture that is completely different from his. Both sides think they're the pinnacle of civilization, and the other is not. It goes deeper, and we'll get into that after the finale. But I think as far as setting expectations goes, this is a good place to start. It focuses on Blackthorne and how Japan changes him rather than being a story of how he changed Japan. First things first, the main thing I want the show to deliver in its finale is to show how Mariko's death matters. That's pretty much it. In my video for the last episode, I talked about how on a personal level, it wasn't a pointless death. So here I'm talking about the bigger picture. For how everything has been put together, that really is the emotional center of what we've seen, and should have ripple effects across the conclusions for each of the characters' stories. She did it in service of her lord, and I know a lot of people are hoping to see him engage in a big battle, but the main thing I want to see him do is what he promised Nagakado at his grave. Don't waste it. Don't waste any of the sacrifices that were made for him. The trailer is brief. It opens with Alvido and Blackthorne walking through a forest, with the Jesuit telling him that Ishido has declared war. Toranaga will be dead in weeks. We'll come back to the war bit when we talk about Ishido, but I think what stands out here is the time frame. You're saying we've got weeks. For the entire season, Toranaga has been doing what he can to buy time, over and over. So presuming he would anticipate this, it seems like it should be part of his plan. It also sounds like he would be drawing them out of the fortified city of Osaka, because when we see him in the next shot, he's sitting in a wooded area and doesn't appear to be being escorted by Saki's men. We saw his brother in Osaka in the last episode, which made the theories that he was part of the plan seem less likely. But then again, as I said in my episode 7 video, I didn't think that was the case either way. The show focused more on Toranaga early than the book does. That switches perspective at the very end, and that's where we get insights into what he's been trying to do. As far as the show, that's really the same thing I want. I want to just know what his plan was, how he foresaw that coming together, and really just add some context to what we've already seen. We also see him walking away from Blackthorne, who's on his knees, and it looks like the headman spy from Ajiro is standing next to him. Hard to say what might be going on there, but we hear Blackthorne yell, "Don't you understand? I came to your shores to use you." This is interesting, but as I mentioned, it's kind of hard to put together what's happening on the little bit that we see. If you had to guess, the Anjin probably wants to get his ship back, because that's what he's wanted to do for the entire season. But how will that change after Mariko's death? That's the real question. Is this a statement of self-examination or an outburst because he can't get the Erasmus back? He is a privateer or a pirate, depending on who you ask, and he did come there to wrangle trade away from the Portuguese Catholics so that he could capitalize off the godless savages, as he described the Japanese. As recently as right before they traveled to Osaka, he was trying to sail under Yabu's flag after Toranaga cut him loose, and promising him the black ship's gold, so the self-examination angle wouldn't be coming out of nowhere. Another thing that pops out is that in his next scene, he unsheathed his short sword, with Toranaga turning to give him a very serious look. He isn't fighting anyone there, not even the old guy headman, or at least he's not fighting anyone effectively, so this would be meaningless as a threat as far as that goes. Is he threatening to commit seppuku? Maybe. And I think they want you to think that at least, because a little bit later they show Toranaga taking the position as someone's second, and to me that feels like a misdirection. Because if they got to that point, I can't think of anything that would stop them, and I kind of doubt that the show would end Blackthorne's story that way. He might get to a point where he wants to die after what happened to Mariko, if he feels trapped there, or if Toranaga is still withholding his plans or insisting he's still going to surrender. I could see him threatening it in that situation to try to get this thing going, trying to get Toranaga to fight back. If Toranaga is seconding for someone, which it does look like he's doing, it's more likely that that would be for Yabu, who we see two samurai grabbing up in the one scene we see with him in it. As far as ripple effects are concerned, I love the character Yabushige, and the performance has been amazing to watch. But he did what he did, and he's been flipping sides throughout the series. If anyone should be committing seppuku, it should be him. There's also a shot of Omi on his knees where it looks like he might be getting grabbed up. And while I would say that it would be unfortunate if his uncle got too, he's done some things on his own, like manipulating Nagakado, that were questionable. He's no saint. He's also made himself useful and shown himself to be smarter than his uncle, which Toranaga recognized after Jozen's unfortunate end. Omi might get a pass, but Yabushige probably should pay for his part in Mariko's death at least. The only person I want to see live for sure is Fuji, and she was pretty committed to dying as soon as her 6-month contract to be Blackthorne's consort was up. She has her reasons, but I can't help but think that since we see her in the trailer, she might decide to live. Here's hoping. Plus, her grandfather came to her and asked her just before we lost him, which makes me think it's possible. And there was a connection established between her and Blackthorne, so if he ends up stuck there, maybe there's something to work with there. The only other shots in the trailer are a quick one of Kiri and Shizu walking through Osaka wearing hats that look to be related to Mariko's death, and then we see Lord Ishido say that the vote is done. War is inevitable. Ochiba is behind him and all the regents are present. It's not surprising that he would be provoked to act after the shinobi plan backfired so thoroughly. But what's more interesting is how the ripple effects of that will be felt here. Kiyama was caught up because Mariko called on him as a Christian to be her second, and it was heavily implied that if she were allowed to die, it would stir important people up. So what would killing her with a bomb do? Is everyone there still in support? Plus, Ochiba may not have much room to maneuver, but she has to be affected. And there are still those deathbed warnings she got when the Taiko's wife died. There are a lot of ways things could go wrong for Ishido. It's more of a question of what will happen and when. When you think about it like that, an epic battle doesn't seem necessary for Toranaga to turn the tables. I'm not even sure he has reasonable forces to put up a fight if it came to that. We'll have to see, because there's also this footage from a VFX trailer that looks like they're on the battlefield, in their armor, ready to go. It should be noted that the video also talks about how they created a lot of forces digitally, which is probably fine for crowds at a distance, but not actual battle scenes. So I wouldn't put too much stock into this footage. It's certainly not a confirmation that we're going to see a battle. I know there were battles in history, I know that they could go there, and I know if a battle happens in the book or not. The show is the show, so neither of those things matters necessarily. The major change it made was to shift the focus away from Blackthorne to a certain degree to spend more time developing the Japanese characters' perspectives. We know about Toranaga and spent more time with him. Was it setting him up for glory on the battlefield? It's a good question to think about. Does that mean Blackthorne is useless then? Not at all. Remember that pivotal moment back in episode 2 when he drew the map for Toranaga and explained how the Spanish had carved up the new world? He's given the Japanese valuable insights that they wouldn't have otherwise. And he helped to advance their knowledge of cannons, which is something the Portuguese held back on when they were enriching themselves through arms sales. Blackthorne has already contributed a lot, and depending on Toranaga's plan, these are areas where he might need his expertise in the future. I expect there to be some payoff in the finale. And don't forget, Blackthorne saved his life twice, and has been clamoring to be involved. His perspective may have changed in light of what happened in Osaka, but it wouldn't make sense for him to suddenly be content with sitting on his hands in the final chapter. On the official podcast, when the host Emily Yoshida, who's also a writer on the show, asked the director Fred Toye about this finale, he said this: "Well, I think that the finale is very subtle, and I think that it's a place that you don't expect to go in the finale of something so epic and huge as this show. And I think the loss of Mariko is felt not only in Blackthorne and the other characters and Toranaga's experience, but it also has this kind of impact on history that you feel when you watch the episode, because the final episode starts to bring in the historical context of all these events that we've been watching from a character standpoint. And I think that seeing the scale of it, and of course we touch on Sekigahara and other historical events, but I think that learning the history as a person who knows nothing about it, myself being that person also, and seeing the context of the events of these characters over the last 9 to now 10 hours that we've been watching it, I think that it has an incredible impact. It looks like the runtime is over an hour, 63 minutes, so there's still a decent amount of story left to tell. The other area where the show changed things up was cutting out part of the time that John and Mariko spent as lovers. Seeing how things ended up, I think it worked because in this case, wanting has the same impact as having and losing would. The lasting effect she had on him is the important part, which exists in both cases. So sometimes not getting things is the way to go, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.